Two common statements I hear quite a bit from clients are: number one, I don't want him or her to see me like this. And number two, I don't want to feel like this. And they're such strong utterances. I mean, for us to deny ourselves what we are actually experiencing, and not only that, expect our relationships to be strong by denying the other person the knowledge of where it is that we're actually at. It's just preposterous. And I think we like to think that we're very logical and that we're very rational, and by moving away from the emotional side of things, we are very stoic and reserved and self-sufficient. And the reality is, when it comes to utilizing the more logical side of our brains, when it comes to learning, when it comes to processing things, we don't actually use them all that much. We're basically living our life through Netflix and Facebook and Instagram. We're not utilizing the grey matter at all. So to say, oh, I veer away from the emotional side of things, I'm more practical, isn't really that factual, because again, we're very much constructed, we're very much a result of our past experiences, our biases, and what it is that we're engaging with day in and day out. We're on autopilot and we don't even realize it, and we like to think that we're so autonomous, and the reality is that we're not. We're kind of very much looking to other people to tell us what to think, to tell us what we should like, to tell us what our lives should be like, what we should expect from ourselves, what we should expect from other people. We're not listening to our truth. We're not tapping into what it is that we actually feel, and we're building a life based on a false self as opposed to who we actually are. And consequently, we're so unhappy. We don't listen to our heart, we don't listen to our gut, we don't listen to our intuition. We have this very narrow view. We believe that once we form an idea or a construct, that that's just fact, and we don't really entertain anything after that. We never consider there being a third option. And I talk quite a bit about the Buddhist concept of the middle way, and it's utilized in so much of the work that I do. And oftentimes we feel like as if everything has to be either or, that it has to be one end of the spectrum or the other. When it comes to our relationships, we have to be all in or all out. Likewise, when it comes to what we do in life, we're either a success or a failure. We either are or we aren't. And life just isn't that simple. I mean, for us to reduce it down to being all or nothing is such a reductionist perspective, but it just completely undermines the capricious nature of our days. We like to think that we're in control, we like to think that there's certainty, and it's so limiting to think like that, because the reality is we know nothing for certain. And if we choose to have that kind of very automated, unconscious way of living as a reason for not tapping into our emotional experience, we're just kidding ourselves, because the reality is our emotions are what's real. They're what give colour, and they're what give life to our day-to-day experience. And for us to deny them because sometimes they're a little bit painful, or we don't want to sit with the message that it is that they're giving us, is just ridiculous. And as well as that, for us to say, oh no, I'm more logical, is likewise a little bit far-fetched, because as I said, we're not really applying our own thought process to things. We're applying the thought process that we believe is safe, that I suppose kind of matches what we assume for the world, and it's not always beneficial. It can be as deceptive as your emotions are. So it's just being very mindful that it's not just a case of having to mind your emotions and regulate them and listen to them and be very aware of sometimes how misleading they can be, or sometimes how what the what it is that they're trying to tell you. We need to have the same mentality with our thoughts. We need to be very careful about what it is that we choose to believe, about what it is that we choose to question, and the more aware that we are of our emotional state and what it is that it's telling us, the more aware we are of our thoughts and what is true and what isn't true and what is potentially beneficial and what's not, the better a life we're going to live. Just that's the way it is. And it's sounds so straightforward, and yet it can be extremely difficult because it involves being conscious, it involves being awake, it involves being aware, and we just are surrounded by distractions. I mean, literally anything that takes us away from the toil and the, I suppose, mundaneness and sometimes suffering of having to think and having to feel some of the tougher stuff is addictive, because what it is doing is it is having some sort of negative consequence on your ability to tap into your authenticity, to understand what your real experience is, and I think we need to revisit the whole concept of addiction. And I definitely find a lot of interest in following people like Gabor Mate, where they kind of re-educate on the concept of addiction. We tend to think of addiction as the less socially acceptable things like, drugs, like alcohol, like sex. And yet, when it comes to our day-to-day lives, anything that distracts us away from what it is that we need to be dealing with, that we need in order to live up to our full potential and to show up in our relationships, to show up for ourselves, is basically a form of avoidance, and it has a negative consequence, and it gives us that little dopamine hit, and it basically just keeps us in a place of automated thoughts and, I suppose, repression of feelings, and that goes for anything. That goes for being completely addicted to your job, addicted to exercise, addicted to food, addicted to porn, addicted to your phone, whatever it is. There's a distraction out there, and it's about looking at your life and being very honest with yourself and very humble and being like, hang on a second here, am I expecting this amazing life, and am I suppose walking the path required to get there? Because the key to a more evolved way of thinking, a more transformed life, is to fully experience everything, good, bad and indifferent, to be very self-aware again of your good parts and your bad parts, accepting the randomness that is life, accepting that you're not in control of everything, trying not to always have to attach meaning to what is meaningless. I mean, sometimes we just have to surrender and let it be and just try to bring it inwards and see what it is that we can do to connect better with others, to connect better with ourselves, to create a life of curiosity and purpose and creativity and love and connection and kindness, as opposed to having very fixed ideas of what it is life should look like, what it is that we need to achieve, what we need to avoid, and basically just living a half life. If you'd like to work with me on any of the following, don't be afraid. It's actually a beautiful, beautiful journey. I mean, it's never ending. I'm still very much on it myself. And despite the fact that there is so much pain at times, I prefer to be awake than to just have my head buried and just, kind of try to avoid the reality of life, just to be fully awake, to be fully alive, and to fully experience everything that there is to experience. So get in touch with me on the website. It's fundamentals.ie.